Hello there, sword friends. I'm inviting you to check out my rack. That's a cheap joke, but more or less I put some racks in to hold up my swords, and I had a little bit of a problem. Well, a great problem to have, in that I have a lot of swords, and it was tough to clean them and organize them and see what the hell I was doing since I've moved into my house. Now, in the previous home that I lived in, I had racking all over the place to hold these swords. I didn't have that in my new home. It didn't really go with, well, the closet that I had to put them in, so things changed around a little bit, and I more or less had them leaned up against the side walls of this closet area in my basement, and that's where they stayed. It was hard to clean, hard to organize, and it was driving me nuts. So in the search of racking, what can I do, what would look nice, what would be a better solution than maybe I've had in the past, I thought about a few things. So one was making something a little bit simpler, a little bit more modular, customizable with 2x2 wood and then some dowels poked in. But honestly, the time to make that, well, it wouldn't necessarily be super long. Really making anything is time consuming. In order to get like the oak planks and stuff like that that would allow me to make the stands that I've made in the past, it's just somewhat limiting on price and time if I factor in what it's going to take me to do it, that it'll take a weekend or something to make them, and then having to buy them, transport them, all that kind of stuff. There's a little bit of savings, but honestly, not a huge amount. So I then thought, well, hey, how about Enzo Workshop? And unfortunately, when I reached out to Enzo Workshop, I didn't get a chance to hear back from them I thought they weren't interested in the project when I asked them how many swords I needed to hold up. But they did get back to me, actually, with a really good solution. Unfortunately, it was after I had already committed to something else, but the solution that they have is something that looks awesome. And if you have maybe not quite the same sword addiction that I do, but something that is unhealthy, maybe unhealthy, but in a way that's still displayable, then I think they have a really awesome solution. They showed me a rack that holds 12 swords, and I really liked the outlook of it. I liked how seemingly it could display a product. And so anyway, hopefully that's interesting to you. If you're interested in that, check out Enzo Workshop. They were my first stop. I really like the woodworking that they do. They seem to be cost effective, generally speaking, especially if I factor in the cost of the wood and materials would probably be about as much as me buying it and having it done, well, a better job done from Enzo Workshop. So that's the price of wood and I guess the situation that we're in. I digress though. If I had gone that route, I don't think I actually would have been able to display or hold all the swords. So what I ended up doing is, as I was looking for sword racks and whatnot, there was nothing that did what I needed for the volume of stuff that I happen to have. Now I have more than a few things right now. I don't know how many, but somewhere between 100 and 200, somewhere in there. And so what I needed is something that can hold a lot of swords and keep them all up off the ground and hold them relatively sturdily, and also be open enough and easily enough to access so I can actually see what I'm doing, find the swords I'm looking for as I'm doing videos and content, things like that, as I'm comparing and contrasting them. I need to actually be able to find them easily, and I can't do that if they're all bagged up. I can't do that if they're all leaned against each other. Incidentally, leaning them against the wall and like having a bunch of them leaning on each other, it might not seem like it could be very detrimental, but oil from the swords might run down and like into the carpet, which is not great. Also, when they're leaning on each other, they start to get kind of heavy, and pulling things out from the back, it becomes very easy to knock things against each other and scratch or diminish swords that you're not necessarily intending to, or that might be a little bit more on the fragile side. So not a great solution. Keeping them up is better. And what I found was a very mediocre solution. Not something I necessarily recommend. The idea is sound, but not necessarily the product I got. So I got lumber racks from Amazon, and I was trying to find something that was about the same price as a sword stand. And here I found these lumber racks that were roughly $100 for 4 separate racks, more or less. They could hold, with the 4 pieces that came in the pile, or 8 pieces that came in the pile, I would be able to make several different racks, and they're supposed to be rated for a pretty substantial amount of weight. There's no way that I would trust the amount of weight that is disclosed there. The metal is relatively thin. The welds on them are not in a way that I would trust them hanging up in a garage. It's supposed to be like 300 to 600 pounds or something like that, and I wouldn't think that they would do that. But holding up swords is fine. So I mounted these things up on the wall. I did first like a quick test, just tried to see how they would work. There is a top and bottom, so if you choose to buy the same one that I do, there is a certain way they go on the wall, a certain way that they go together, even though it doesn't necessarily look like it, and they don't come with any instructions. It's simple enough to figure out, but while you're doing it, it's also easy to screw up and drill holes where you don't need them. So Point is, though, that I put one up. It seemed like it would work, though having bare metal and orange looking like a lumber rack wasn't necessarily great. And I was thinking, what could I do? So I could line some tacky felt strip along the top of the layer, or I could do a number of things. I could roll out, you know, sticky cork or something like that, something to give a little cushion between the sword and the lumber rack. And more or less, I thought, well, I have a lot of excess sword bags that I've accumulated over time, and those can safely touch the surface of most swords without like staining or diminishing the lacquer or something like that. So if I put those there, it's probably going to be safe, and then it also obscures kind of the orange color and makes it look a little nicer. So that's actually what I did. I just took a bunch of sword bags and tied them around like I was putting on a glove or something like that on the rack, more like a sock condom or something. But I digress. Point is, I used sword bags to cover it up, and then I wound them up so there's just a slight ledge that keeps them from falling off if they move around or something like that. And that's more or less it. I put a whole bunch of them up after testing it out the first time, went around and successfully measured out even spaces where, you know, the studs were, where I could have some sort of security. I got those, and also where they looked reasonably even. Sometimes you have to pick between hitting a stud and having them look the way you want on the wall. I'm not concerned terribly with installing drywall anchors and holding these swords up, because if I have, between 30 and 15 swords up there, it's enough to not really worry about with the drywall anchors that I'm using, the rating that's on there, and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm not terribly concerned about it, even though it probably ends up being around 100 pounds or something that you're hanging. Maybe not quite that. But I digress. Point is, I've held some of them up with drywall anchors, some of them into studs. They seem to hold up well. I take the ones that are not in sheaths and I put them on the wall with studs, and the really expensive ones, because I'm thinking like, yeah, if one did fall down, what swords would I be okay with doing that on? And so hopefully I put those on the right wall. Anyway, other things that I did while I was out there doing that was I hung up some Suba with some, you know, random paint hanger type stuff or picture hanger type stuff. I had also a set of Hanwei armor. Eventually you'll see me compare this to the Romance of Men armor that was sent my way, but I put that up. I didn't have a separate armor box, so I grabbed a 5-gallon bucket. It's a really frankly, the armor is really diminished. I'm not sure that it warrants more than a 5-gallon bucket, but that's what it's sitting on. It's sitting on a 5-gallon bucket, and now it looks like the armor, rather than being this like tall imposing guardian, is a little guy taking a poop in the closet. So anyway, it looks okay though. I can actually find the swords that I'm looking for. I have a spot to put various things. I can get a vacuum cleaner around it, and I've also then taken some of my photography diffusers and reflectors and put them around the bottom, and that allows me to take some smaller things like knives and stuff like that and at least obscure them from little guy's hands and whatnot in case he gets in the closet. So that's it. I will link the Amazon thing that I bought in the description down below. It doesn't come with a recommendation from me. Some of them were broken and were not particularly good products, but it did work out, and it wasn't a terribly expensive thing. If you're looking to display not 6 to 10 in a lumber rack format, but something a little more elegant, then I think Enzo Workshop is your place to go. They've many moons ago sent me a sword stand to review and check out, and I've loved it. You've seen it featured in a number of videos. I think they do really great work for basically what the lumber would cost me here to do, and the finish work I think is really quite good, and they seem to understand woodworking and understand how to hold up weapons. So if I were doing something that were a little bit more out in the open rather than a sword closet, then I might have gone that way and not been able to hold them all up. It would have taken up quite a bit of wall space. Anyway, I digress. Point is, that would be a better recommendation. If you do go with lumber racks, I might suggest something that isn't the ones that I got, because they are a little bit on the flimsy side. And while they work, I would have rather spent maybe a little bit more and gotten something that's actually sturdy. Unfortunately, I don't necessarily have a recommendation for you. Anyway, that was my journey. Hopefully, I think the sword closet's cool. If you have any questions about it, throw it in the commentary down below, and I will endeavor to answer. That's all I've got. Cheers, and thanks for watching.